To our keynote speaker, whom you glimpsed briefly and then he kind of discreetly disappeared. What can I tell you about him? He's presented more finance and business programs than you and I could possibly think of the titles of. On the Money, Show Me the Money, Working Lunch, Money Box, Wake Up to Money, The Financial World Tonight, World Business Report, Weekend Business Story. The list goes on and on. He's also twice been voted Financial Personality of the Year by thousands of small shareholders across the land. The man is patently irrepressible. He is your keynote speaker. He is Declan Curry.
Sue, thank you very much for that generous introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's a great pleasure to be invited to join you on National Freelancers Day, to be at this event here in London, to be with our friends and associates in Manchester, in Edinburgh, and wherever people happen to be watching this online as well. The event organised by the Association of Independent Professionals and the Self-Employed, IPSE. I've been asked to speak for about 25, 30 minutes or so, nothing too heavy, just one or two remarks about the life as a freelancer and the importance of the role that we play in the life of the nation. And clearly these topics are important to us because here we all are, here this evening, in this room, in Manchester, in Edinburgh, rather than where we should be, which is at home, watching The Apprentice. Because that show really does tell us what it's like to work for yourself and be your own boss. Only the BBC could make Alan Sugar into a hero of enterprise. Anyway, I'm Declan Curry. I chair events and I speak at conferences and seminars in Britain, Europe, Asia, the United States, Latin America. I've been a journalist for more than 20 years. I've presented TV programs and radio programs about business and the workplace. I've written for magazines, newspapers and websites in the UK and internationally. I've won a number of awards, as Sue was gracious enough to mention, the IFA Business and Finance Journalist of the Year, the ProShare Favourite Financial Personality. You know, of course, what they say about awards for people in the media. They are like piles. In the end, every arsehole gets one. And the thing that people remember most of all, I think, is that for the best part of a decade, I was on breakfast television. I was one of the many fat Irishmen on your TV screen first thing in the morning. And it's the Irishness that sort of sticks in people's memory because I've been called Declan. I'm much more likely to be called Dermot. I am occasionally called Eamon. And I have to tell you, I've also been called far worse. The names all sort of blur into one, which is annoying for anyone who's on television because we all hanker for that moment when we are recognised, when a total stranger approaches you in the street and says, "I know you and I love the work that you do." It's never happened to me, but Sue Lawley tells me it's an amazing sensation when it does. I'm delighted to see Nick Ferrari's here tonight from LBC. I started my radio career at LBC quite some time ago, making the tea for Angela Rippon. It's true. LBC is now heard nationwide and now listened to by more than 1 million listeners, things that we could only dream of when I worked there. So congratulations to you and to the team, Nick. LBC also has a great programme for self-employment and for independent professionals. And tomorrow night is the last one of its season. It's on at 9 o'clock and it's presented by Emma Jones, who is here with us as well. She's shouting that there's someone else in the studio talking at the same time, apparently. They're called co-presenters. So, I've worked at the BBC, for the BBC, around the BBC for 20 years or so, under a variety of different terms and conditions. The BBC is a true bureaucracy. Nothing exists unless it's on paper. If a tree falls in a forest, it will only be heard if it does it in triplicate. So even the greenest freelancers get a contract. And when I started, I was on daily contracts. I didn't know until the end of the day whether I would be needed again the following day. Then daily contracts became weekly contracts, became monthly contracts, at which point I got a little bit tired of it all and said I was going to get a job elsewhere, at which point a staff job appeared, materialised magically from within the BBC system. I was a full-time employee, then a part-time employee, so I could do some other journalism as a freelance, then back on the full-time staff with a parallel freelance business in public speaking. Then my role at the BBC changed, and I stopped being a member of staff entirely and became a contractor, selling my services to the highest bidder. Thank you, IPSI, for your cheque for tonight. So it felt that I'd sort of come in full circle again over the course of those 20-odd years. And to me, that felt like the most natural thing in the world. It was a flexible provision of services to suit me and suit my clients. To my parents, one a civil servant, the other a school teacher, it all felt a little bit highly irregular and erratic and insecure. And I would assume that for many people in this country, that is still how they think. They think there is something not quite right about freelancing, that it's risky, that it's vulnerable, that there's something a little bit dodgy about it, especially when it comes to tax. And the mass media, which are, irony of ironies, great consumers of freelance talent, they perversely help to reinforce those attitudes with everything from Del Boy to Lord Sir Alan to frequent mentions in the public print of moonlighters. And I suspect that this view is held most strongly of all in the most entrenched bureaucracy of the lot, Her Majesty's government and the civil service, representatives of whom have arrived right on cue. Good evening to you. I think that attitude and where it resides gives all of us in this room and in Edinburgh and in Manchester a problem, because it informs the attitude and the approach of revenue and customs. It shapes the policies that are supposedly designed for business, yet leave us out on a regular basis. And it reinforces our invisibility in the corridors of power and the centres for policy. And I'll develop those thoughts over the next few minutes. Pardon me just 1 second. I'll develop those thoughts shortly. When I was growing up, we were told that the future was going to be big. Big business ruled. That is all that mattered in the labour market. I come from Strabane. It's a market town on the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. It's away up in the far northwest of the island of Ireland, and we pride ourselves as being a place of storytellers and poets and musicians. Several American presidents hailed from there. The guy who printed the American Declaration of Independence came from my hometown. When I was growing up there in the 70s and the 80s during the Troubles, Strabane didn't have an awful lot going for it. We had two primary claims to fame. We had the fastest talking man in the whole of Britain and Ireland. He was called Georgie Cunningham. He also had a dog that could sing the tune to Coronation Street. And for both of those things, he got on Sue Lawley's programme on Nationwide, making him a local celebrity. Our other claim to fame was that we had the highest unemployment rate in the whole of Western Europe. And that's quite a staggering accolade. And in the 60s and the 70s, big companies were seen as the answer, the only answer, to things like unemployment. They created the jobs on their terms in locations that they chose. So if you had an unemployment black spot like Strabane, the solutions were that you bribed a big company, preferably a multinational, to come and set up and open a factory in your area, or you persuaded workers in your town to move to another area which had just recently successfully bribed a multinational to come along and set up operation there. The idea that you could create work for yourself and be your own boss, it was as fanciful. Actually, it wouldn't have occurred to people. And for those who did think of it, it would have been as fanciful as flying to the moon. It might be something you got away with in that London, but we don't do that sort of thing here. Pull yourself together, boy. What are you possibly thinking of? And even government reports of the time, official documents of state, said so, that the encouragement of small business was a waste of money, that the only future was with big companies creating lots of jobs, and government support, government attention, government policy should be concentrated there with big companies. So, how's that argument from the 1960s looking today? Well, it's looking every bit as good as Centrepoint or all the other concrete monstrosities that were constructed at that time. Because as Sue and Judy both said, there are now more than 4 million, close to 5 million people who work for themselves, a record number. Of that, nearly 2 million are independent professionals. And all of us here are proud to be part of that group. In 2 years from now, it's expected there will be more of us working for ourselves than there will be working for the government bureaucracy, the civil service and local councils. Ipsos figures say that the self-employed and independent professionals, all of us together, we add £95 billion to the business turnover of Britain in 2003. That's a larger economic component than Britain's car-making industry. We offer companies access to exceptional skills and talent for them to draw on at a time of their choosing. We reduce risk. We minimise red tape. We maximise performance. We enable business to be flexible, innovative and competitive. And it's not a one-way street. We decide when we want to work and with whom. We have greater control of our work-life balance. Now, for some, the decision to become self-employed or independent professionals may well have been triggered by the job cuts and the layoffs during the Depression. But that does not make us the second best option, the something that you do waiting for something better to come along. As our winner of the 15 in 15, Rebecca Shipman, demonstrates, you can do exactly what you want and it doesn't feel like work. We savour the freedom and the flexibility, the autonomy to satisfy the competing calls on our time from clients, from family, social and society. Hardly surprising that the number of working mothers becoming independent professionals is up 55%. And that it's increasingly popular with new young workers who were never part of the church of corporate compliance, a working generation that more than any before demands to be satisfied and fulfilled, not just made rich by what they do. The fastest growing segment of the freelance workforce is those aged under 29. And as the economy becomes increasingly dominated by knowledge, our importance and our contribution to the national wealth will increase. Freelancing, of course, covers the widest range of sectors and industries, but independent professionals dominate in media, in creative industries, in software, and in app development. And Ipsos figures suggest that of those working in artistic, literary, and media occupations, 3 in 5 are independent professionals. They are jobs that rely on imagination, on innovation, and on flexibility. They are not jobs that can be copied on the cheap on the other side of the world. These are the jobs that will earn or keep with the rest of the globe. And the growing importance of the independent professional is an immense change in our working environment and in the ecosystem of our economy. It will also force change in the treatment of the self-employed and the individual professional. And I mentioned some of the issues that need to be addressed. The approach and attitude of revenue and customs, policies for business that regularly leave us out, and invisibility in the corridors of power. There are other issues on which Ipsos campaigns, and it can tell you about them itself. I'm choosing to highlight these ones. Let's start with tax. Let's get all that frustration out of our system. It's fair to say this. Revenue and Custom does a difficult job with increasing demands, with decreasing resources. It's a hugely important job. They are securing for the nation the money that it needs to pay for roads, for railways, for schools, for hospitals, for police and prison officers. It's the money that's the stitching of our social fabric. It is, by its nature, a thankless task. And I don't think anyone here in this room should or does have any problem with paying our fair share of tax, with paying what society judges to be the correct amount appropriate to our means and our need. It is the national membership fee. However, tax isn't just about collecting cash. It's also a tool deployed by government to persuade us to do what it thinks is in our best interest. It is the carrot and the stick. But we find that when government asks to do something, and we do it, and more of us do it than it expects, government has that annoying habit of complaining that too many of us have followed the lead that it set, that the policy, in Sir Humphrey Appleby's words, was too successful. Gordon Brown, as Chancellor, stood at the dispatch box in the Commons and said the nation needed more people to set up their own company. And many did exactly as he suggested, and I would guess that it was pretty irritating for them some years later to hear the government, with him as Prime Minister, suggest that people who trade through their own companies do so for the primary reason of avoiding tax. The revenue must collect the money that it's owed. It must protect against fraud. It must prevent evasion. But the attitude of the revenue towards the self-employed and the independent professional is also often similar to that of the dog to the lamppost. And that's pretty hard to take when the revenue is so keen to cut sweetheart deals with major international banks and telecoms companies just because they have good teams of lawyers and they end up paying a lot less tax than they might well have done. Those lost billions could have gone a long way to paying back the national debt or easing the squeeze on public spending. So we need a tax system Thank you. So we need a tax system that works better for the flexible workplace and the knowledge economy of the future. The traditional model based around just employer and employee no longer works effectively. There has to be a way of simplifying the tax system, and great work has been done on this by the likes of John Whiting from the Tax Simplification Body. There has to be a way of simplifying the tax system so it collects money more effectively, more consistently, causing less inconvenience, consuming less time, and with some courtesy. It is, after all, our money which they are collecting, which we have generated through our hard work, drive and ambition. The IPSE manifesto makes several pertinent points, all demanding further discussion and exploration. It says the IR35 rules are broken, they're impossible to understand, they're impossible to implement with consistency or certainty, they're expensive for government, they're expensive for the self-employed. It's time for them to go. It is also time for some fairness. Independent professionals are knowledge workers. They need to refresh that knowledge to keep abreast of the best information and insight in their field. It's an essential for doing business, so it should enjoy the same benefits in the tax system as big companies get when they pay for training for their individual workers. And one other thing that IPSE calls for that I think makes a lot of sense, and that is providing a place to work. I mentioned that old industrial strategy to deal with unemployment, the strategy that governments used to cling to. You stimulate economic growth and you create new jobs by getting global businesses to set up locally. And as part of those deals, governments and councils would often provide factories or workshops for those companies to use. Fair enough. So why not update that and take that traditional approach and give it a modern setting? Provide space for self-employed people and independent professionals to use when they need something a bit bigger than their spare bedroom or their garage, and something more regularly than rented office space from the likes of Regis. Central government and local councils are awash with properties that they're not using and which, to the immense frustration of the Treasury, they're not selling. The departments and the councils want to keep them and sell them off gradually when they've got holes in their budgets, rather than sell them all now as a single job lot. But while they've still got those properties, why not convert the empty properties, the empty housing stock, into work hubs so that self-employed people have a commercial base and can grow their businesses? And while we're at it, why don't we make it easier for commercial landlords to convert empty, derelict, boarded up shops on high streets into work hubs, bringing some life and some commerce back into town centres? That these fairly simple ideas have to be asked for, that they are not immediately apparent to policymakers, is demonstration that the self-employed and the independent professional are too often invisible in the corridors of power and the centres of policymaking. Now, you could argue that with a civil service that places its highest premium on longevity and a parliament that's full of lifelong political hacks and social science lecturers, that's what you're going to get. But IPSE has long suggested a minister for the self-employed. Some of you might think that a minister for anything is rarely a good idea, but we now have a czar, a self-employment czar, as Sue said, confirmed by the Prime Minister on Twitter today, and that will give us visibility in Whitehall, in Westminster. It will stimulate thinking about policy, and it will create a structure into which IPSE and others can feed in. Remember that prediction from the very start of my remarks. By the end of the year after next, there will be more self-employed and independent professionals than there will be public sector workers. Do we have the clout of the public sector? We do not. We don't have trade unions paying for MPs. We don't have corporate lobbyists buying influence with foie gras and Sancerre. No CBI conference for us. No City of London Guildhall dinner. IPSE works tremendously hard, of course, to shape opinion. Its manifesto is a great contribution to the debate. but the influence game is tough and it's highly competitive. But appropriately for a group of people who believe in self-starting, who believe in the power of the individual, there is a lot that we can do ourselves to make our own case in the local media, to local officials and to MPs. And with an election just 7 months away, they are listening. And we need to remind them of this. The number of self-employed is great and growing. We already make an enormous contribution to the wealth of the nation, and as the economy becomes more focused on knowledge, that's only going to increase. We allow companies to be more productive and more efficient. We offer a more flexible way of working, allowing people to strike a better balance between work, family and society. That will become more important as society gets older. We need a tax system that's fit for purpose, and we need a government that will occasionally pay attention. Just one final thought. As you know, being successful in business is actually quite simple. The recipe for success was set out quite some time ago by one of the richest industrialists the planet has ever seen, by the American oil billionaire John Rockefeller. And Rockefeller said that to be successful, we only have to do 3 things. We have to rise early in the morning, we have to work late in the day, and we have to find oil. Well, that worked for him, and it worked for the people of Aberdeen. But for the rest of us here in London, in Manchester, in Edinburgh, and watching on the web, we all have to try that little bit harder, and we will, because that's the type of people that we are. Thank you very much.